The sketch was nearly finished when the wind threatened to tear it from her hands, and Lillian Novak wondered if this would be the drawing that finally earned her enough to eat something more substantial than stale bread. The Oklahoma Territory stretched before her in shades of amber and rust, a landscape both beautiful and merciless under the relentless sun of 1887. She had positioned herself on a wooden crate outside the general store in Carlin, a dusty settlement that barely qualified as a town, hoping someone might take interest in her work before the day ended and her stomach cramped any harder. Her fingers were stained with charcoal, her dress worn thin at the elbows, and her boots had holes she stuffed with newspaper each morning. 3 months had passed since her father died from fever, leaving her alone and penniless in a world that had little patience for women without family or fortune. The small inheritance he left had vanished into paying his debts, and Lillian found herself with only her artistic talent and a stubborn refusal to give up entirely. "How much for that one?" a gravelly voice asked. Lillian looked up to see an older woman with silver hair twisted into a severe bun, her expression sharp but not unkind. $2, madam," the woman snorted. "For a drawing, I can see the real thing by just turning my head." "Then you would not have it to keep, to remember," Lillian said softly, trying to keep the desperation from her voice. "This particular light, this exact moment, it will never exist again." The woman studied her for a long moment, then fished in her purse and produced a $1. "That's all I can spare." Lillian took it with trembling fingers and handed over the sketch. $1 would buy her a meal and maybe a night in the boarding house if the proprietor was feeling generous. She watched the woman walk away, then turned back to her sketchbook with a heavy heart. The paper was running low and she had no money to purchase more. "You are blocking the entrance," a man said behind her, his tone more amused than annoyed. Lillian scrambled to her feet, gathering her materials. "I apologize, I did not mean to obstruct anyone. No harm done." The speaker was tall, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of creek water after a storm. He wore typical cowboy attire, dusty leather chaps over worn denim, a brown vest over a faded blue shirt, and a hat that had seen better years. Something about his stance suggested capability, a man comfortable in his own body and the world around him. He appeared to be in his mid-20s, perhaps 26 or 27, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days of stubble. He glanced at the sketchbook in her hands. "You drew that?" Lillian nodded, suddenly self-conscious about her disheveled appearance. She was 20 years old but felt ancient with exhaustion and worry. "It is good," he said simply. "Real good. You capture something most folks miss, the way the land breathes." The compliment caught her off guard and she felt heat rise to her cheeks. "Thank you, sir. Vincent Quade," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Most folks call me Vince." Lillian Novak. Vincent studied her with those storm-colored eyes, and she had the uncomfortable sensation that he saw past the proud tilt of her chin to the hunger and fear beneath. "You staying in Carlin?" "For now," she said vaguely. In truth, she had nowhere else to go. "The restaurant across the way serves a decent meal. Perhaps you would join me. I find eating alone tedious and you look like you could use some proper food." Pride warred with necessity. Pride lost. "That would be acceptable, thank you." The restaurant was a simple establishment with wooden tables and benches worn smooth by use. Vincent ordered steak and potatoes for both of them, along with coffee and fresh bread. When the food arrived, Lillian had to force herself to eat slowly, to maintain some semblance of dignity rather than shoving it into her mouth like a starving animal. "How long have you been on your own?" Vincent asked, his voice low enough that other diners could not hear. Lillian paused, the fork halfway to her mouth. What makes you think I am alone? A woman with family would not be selling drawings on the street corner. She set down the fork carefully. My father died 3 months ago. There is no one else. I am sorry for your loss. The simple sincerity in his voice made her throat tighten. She took a sip of coffee to compose herself. And you, Mr. Quade, what brings you to Carlin? Work, mostly. I have been driving cattle from Texas up through the territories. We stopped here to rest and resupply before heading further north. He leaned back, studying her again with that unsettling directness. But I have been thinking it might be time to settle somewhere, find something more permanent. Cattle driving is not permanent. It is hard living, and I am not getting younger. A man starts thinking about what he wants his life to look like in 10 years, 20 years. He paused. You have real talent, Miss Novak. Have you thought about advertising your services more formally? There are ranchers who would pay good money for portraits, landscapes of their property. I lack the resources to travel to ranches or establish a proper studio. Vincent was quiet for a moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. I own some land about 15 miles north of here. Not much yet, just a small ranch I have been building up over the past 2 years. I run cattle and horses, have a few hands who help during busy seasons. The house needs work, but it is solid. Lillian waited, unsure where this was leading. I could use someone to help with the domestic side of things, he continued, his words careful. Cooking, mending, general upkeep. In exchange, you would have room and board safety, and time to draw if you wanted. You are offering me employment. I am offering you an option that is not slowly starving in Carlin. It should have offended her, the blunt assessment of her situation. Instead, she felt a strange relief that someone saw the truth and did not look away from it. You do not know me, Mr. Quade. Why would you make such an offer? I am a decent judge of character, and you strike me as honest and hardworking. Plus, I meant what I said about your drawings. You have a gift. He met her eyes. I am not offering anything improper, Miss Novak. You would have your own quarters, your independence. Just a fair exchange of work for security. Lillian thought about the boarding house where she could barely afford a single night, about selling her drawings for pennies while her supplies dwindled. She thought about the very real possibility of worse alternatives, the desperate choices women in her position were sometimes forced to make. When would this arrangement begin? Tomorrow, if you are willing. We can get you settled, and you can decide after a week if it suits you. If not, I will bring you back to town with enough money to see you through a while. She should have been more cautious, should have asked more questions. But something in Vincent Quade's steady gaze made her feel, for the first time in months, that she might actually survive. I accept your offer, Mr. Quade. Call me Vince, he said, and smiled for the first time. It transformed his face, made him seem younger and less weathered. We will leave at first light. That night, Lillian stayed in a real bed at the boarding house, paid for by Vincent without fanfare. She lay awake for hours, watching moonlight paint silver patterns on the ceiling, wondering if she was being foolish or brave or simply out of options. Her sketchbook lay beside her on the narrow mattress, and she ran her fingers over the rough cover, thinking about Vincent's words. The way the land breathes. He had understood something in her work that most people missed entirely. Sleep finally claimed her near dawn, and she dreamed of wide open spaces and storm-colored eyes. The sun was barely cresting the horizon when Vincent arrived with a wagon. Lillian had few possessions to load, just a battered carpet bag with her clothes, her art supplies, and a photograph of her parents on their wedding day. She climbed onto the wagon seat beside him, acutely aware of his solid presence, the easy way he handled the reins. It is a good morning for traveling, he said as they rolled out of Carlin. Not too hot yet. The landscape unfurled around them, all rolling plains and scattered trees, wildflowers adding splashes of color to the predominant gold of dried grass. Lillian found her fingers itching for her sketchbook, but kept her hands folded in her lap, uncertain of the etiquette of this strange new situation. "You can draw if you want," Vincent said, as if reading her thoughts. "I do not mind quiet." She pulled out her materials gratefully and began sketching as they moved, capturing the way the morning light made everything look newly born, full of possibility. Vincent drove in companionable silence, occasionally pointing out landmarks or wildlife. A hawk circled overhead. A distant cluster of cattle grazed near a creek. "How long have you been drawing?" he asked after a while. "As long as I can remember. My mother encouraged it when I was young. She said everyone needs something that makes them feel alive." Lillian smiled at the memory. "She died when I was 12, and after that, drawing became a way to hold on to things to make them permanent." "That is a good way of thinking about it. You have family, Vince?" His expression clouded slightly. "My parents are both gone. I have a sister in Kansas, married with children. We write occasionally, but we are not close. My real family is the land, I suppose, and the animals I care for." "That sounds lonely." "It can be," he admitted. "But it can also be peaceful. Cities exhaust me, all that noise and crowding. Out here, a man can hear himself think." They rode in silence for a while, and Lillian continued sketching, her hand moving with practiced efficiency. She captured the line of Vincent's shoulders, the way he held the reins with casual competence, but kept that page hidden, feeling oddly shy about it. The ranch appeared gradually, first as a distant speck that grew into buildings and fences. It was modest but well-maintained, a 2-story house with a wraparound porch, a large barn, several outbuildings and corrals containing horses and cattle. Everything spoke of hard work and careful attention. "It is not fancy," Vincent said, sounding almost apologetic. "It is wonderful," Lillian said honestly. After weeks of cramped boarding house rooms and street corners, the space felt impossibly luxurious. He helped her down from the wagon, and she noticed the calluses on his hands, the strength in his grip. A dog came bounding up, a mottled brown and white creature with an enthusiastic tail, and Vincent laughed as he scratched its ears. "This is Rusty. He is supposed to be a cattle dog, but mostly just begs for scraps and takes up space." Lillian knelt and let Rusty sniff her hand before petting him. The dog leaned into her touch, and she felt something in her chest loosen slightly. It had been so long since she had felt welcome anywhere. Vincent showed her around the property, introducing her to the 2 ranch hands who lived in the bunkhouse, grizzled men named Pete and Samuel who nodded politely, but seemed unconcerned by her presence. They were in their 40s, weathered by sun and work, and treated Vincent with obvious respect. The house was clean but sparse, clearly the domain of a man who focused more on function than comfort. The kitchen was well stocked, the sitting room contained a few chairs and a fireplace, and upstairs there were 3 bedrooms. Vincent showed her to the smallest, which had a bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a window overlooking the eastern pastures. "You can arrange it however you like," he said. "Make it your own space." Lillian set down her carpetbag and turned to face him. "What exactly do you expect of me, Vince?" "What are my duties?" "Cooking the main meals, general housekeeping, mending when needed. I am not a tyrant about it. If things are reasonably clean and we are fed, I am satisfied." He paused. "And honestly, I would appreciate the company. It gets quiet with just me and the hands." "That seems like very little work for room and board." "Then use your spare time for your art. Sell your drawings if you want. Keep the money. I do not claim any part of that." His generosity made her suspicious simply because it was so unusual. Men generally wanted something in return, some unspoken debt to be repaid. But Vincent's expression was open, guileless in a way that suggested he genuinely meant what he said. "I will do my best to be useful," she said finally. "I have no doubt of that." He moved toward the door, then paused. "Supper is usually around 6. Nothing fancy required." After he left, Lillian sat on the bed and let herself absorb the reality of her new circumstances. Through the window, she could see Vincent walking toward the barn, Rusty trotting at his heels. The afternoon sun caught his profile, and she thought again about the sketch she had made in the wagon, the one she had kept hidden. She unpacked her few belongings, then spent time exploring the kitchen, taking stock of supplies. There was flour, salt, coffee, beans, some dried meat, and root vegetables in a cellar. Basic ingredients, but enough to make decent meals. She found herself already planning menus, thinking about what she could create. That evening, she prepared a simple supper of beef stew with potatoes and carrots, fresh bread and coffee. Vincent ate with obvious appreciation, complimenting her cooking in a way that seemed genuine rather than merely polite. They talked about the ranch, about his plans for expansion, about the challenges of the territory. "The winters here can be brutal," he said. "Last year we lost a dozen head of cattle to a blizzard. You have to be prepared, have reserves stored up." "Were you born in Oklahoma?" "Texas originally. Came up here looking for opportunities. Land is cheaper, more available for folks willing to work hard." He paused. "What about you? Where did you grow up?" "Missouri, near Kansas City. My father was a clerk, kept books for various businesses." "We were not wealthy, but we were comfortable." The past tense hurt. "After my mother died, things became harder. He drank more, worked less. We moved around a lot, trying to find places where he could start fresh. We ended up in Carlin 6 months ago, and he found work at the mill. Then the fever came. That is a hard road for anyone." "I survived," she said simply. "That is what matters." Vincent looked at her across the table, and she saw respect in his eyes. "You are stronger than you know, Lillian." The words stayed with her that night as she lay in her new bed, listening to unfamiliar sounds. Cattle lowing in the distance, the creak of the house settling, wind whispering across the plains. It was so different from the cramped silence of the boarding house, from the constant noise of Carlin's streets. Here, she could breathe. The days developed a rhythm. Lillian woke early, prepared breakfast for Vincent and the hands, spent mornings on housework and preparations for the next meal. Afternoons were her own, and she used them to draw. Sometimes she walked the property, sketching the landscape, the animals, the play of light on buildings. Sometimes she sat on the porch, capturing the endless sky. Vincent often worked near the house, and they fell into easy conversation. He told her about cattle markets and horse breeding, about the politics of the territory as it moved toward statehood. She talked about art techniques, about the paintings she had seen in museums back in Missouri, about her dreams of maybe, someday, having her work displayed somewhere permanent. "Why not now?" Vincent asked one afternoon. They were sitting on the porch, taking a break from their respective labors. He was mending a saddle, and she was sketching the barn. "Because galleries do not display work from unknown artists living on Oklahoma ranches. So become known. Send your work to newspapers, to businesses looking for advertisements. Build a reputation. That requires money for postage, for materials, for travel. What if those things were not obstacles?" He set down the saddle and looked at her directly. "What if you had the resources to pursue this seriously?" "That is a fantasy." "Maybe not. You have talent, real talent. I am not the only one who sees it." He gestured toward the house. "Pete mentioned his daughter is getting married in Guthrie next month. He wants to commission a portrait of the couple as a gift, said he would pay $25. Lillian's hand stilled on the sketch. $25. And Samuel asked if you might draw his late wife from an old photograph he carries. He will pay what he can. Vincent leaned forward. Word spreads, Lillian. You do good work, people will talk. Before long, you will have more commissions than you can handle. Hope was a dangerous thing, but it bloomed in her chest anyway. You truly think so? I know so. That conversation marked a shift in their relationship. Vincent became not just her employer, but her champion, her advocate. When he went into Carlin for supplies, he took some of her drawings to display at the general store, telling people about the artist at his ranch. When neighboring ranchers visited, he made sure they saw her work. Slowly, commissions began arriving. A landscape for a rancher building a new house. A portrait of children for a woman who wanted to send it to relatives back east. Small jobs that added up to actual income, to the first money Lillian had earned that felt sustainable. With each drawing, with each satisfied customer, she felt herself coming back to life. The hollow desperation that had defined her months in Carlin began to fade, replaced by something that felt almost like contentment. She laughed more easily, slept more soundly, moved through the world without the constant weight of fear. And through it all, she grew more aware of Vincent. The way he moved with understated grace despite his size. The kindness in his voice when he talked to the animals, the patience he showed with the hands when teaching them new skills. His quiet competence, the sense that he was someone who could be relied upon in any crisis. She caught herself watching him more often, noticing details. The way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck. The laugh lines around his eyes. The careful way he washed his hands before meals, respecting her space and efforts. Small things that added up to a larger picture of a good man, the kind of man she had not believed truly existed. Summer deepened into August, heat pressing down like a physical weight. Lillian took to sketching in the early mornings and late evenings when the light was beautiful and the temperature more bearable. One evening, she was sitting by the creek that ran through the property, trying to capture the way the setting sun turned the water to gold. Vincent appeared, leading his horse to drink. "May I join you?" "Of course." He settled onto the grass beside her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. For a while they sat in companionable silence, watching the horse drink and the sun descend. "I have been thinking," Vincent said eventually, "about what comes next." Next. With the ranch, with life. He plucked a piece of grass and twisted it between his fingers. "When I made you the offer to work here, I thought I was doing a good thing, helping someone who needed it. But the truth is, you have helped me more than I helped you." Lillian looked at him, confused. "How?" "This place was lonely before you arrived. I did not realize how lonely until I had someone to share it with." He turned to face her, and she saw vulnerability in his expression that took her breath away. "You have made this feel like a home instead of just a place I work. Your presence, your art, your perspective on things, it has changed everything." Her heart was beating too fast. "Vince, I am not saying this to make you uncomfortable or to change our arrangement. You are free to stay here as long as you want with no expectations beyond what we agreed." He paused, seeming to gather courage. "But I need you to know that I have come to care for you deeply. More than an employer should care for someone in their household. If there is any chance that you might feel the same, I would very much like to know." Lillian set down her sketchbook with trembling hands. She had felt the attraction growing between them, had tried to suppress it, because it seemed foolish and dangerous to fall for the man who had saved her from destitution. But hearing him speak the words out loud, seeing the hope and fear mingled in his eyes, she could not deny her own feelings any longer. "I feel the same," she said softly. "I have tried not to because it seemed ungrateful or inappropriate, but I cannot help it. "You are the kindest man I have ever known, Vince. You saw me at my lowest and treated me with dignity. You believed in my art when no one else did. You made me feel safe for the first time since my father died." She took a shaky breath. "I care for you very much." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise, bright and transformative. "Lillian." He reached for her hand and she let him take it, felt the calluses on his palm, the gentle strength in his fingers. They sat like that as the sun finished setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, and Lillian thought that no landscape she had ever captured could compare to this moment. "May I court you properly?" Vincent asked. "Take you to dances in town, introduce you as more than just my housekeeper." "I would like that." He lifted her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles with a gentleness that made her chest ache. "You have given me a reason to build something lasting, Lillian. Not just a ranch, but a real future." They began courting officially the next day, though in truth little changed in their daily routine. They still worked, still talked on the porch in the evenings, still shared meals. But now there was an understood promise beneath it all, a foundation they were building together. Vincent took her to a dance in Guthrie, introducing her proudly to friends and business associates. Lillian wore her best dress, mended and pressed until it looked almost new, and danced with him under lantern light while a fiddle band played. He was not a graceful dancer, but he was enthusiastic and his joy was infectious. "I have not danced since I was a girl," she said, breathless and laughing. "Neither have I, not really. I am likely stepping on your feet. I do not mind." They drove back to the ranch under a canopy of stars so bright it seemed impossible, and Vincent pointed out constellations, telling her stories his father had taught him. Lillian listened and watched his face, thinking how much she loved the sound of his voice, the way he got animated when talking about things that mattered to him. "Stay," he said as they reached the ranch. "I mean, I know you are staying, but stay forever. Marry me, Lillian. Make this your home permanently." She had known the question was coming, had felt it in the way he looked at her, the tenderness in every interaction, but hearing it still made her heart race. "Are you certain? We have only known each other 4 months. I have never been more certain of anything." "I love you. I love your strength and your talent and the way you see beauty in everything. I love how you talk to Rusty like he is a person and how you hum while you cook. I love the way you draw light, like you are capturing something holy." He took both her hands. "I know I am not refined or educated. I work with my hands and I smell like cattle half the time, but I will spend every day trying to make you happy if you will let me." Tears blurred her vision. "You are exactly what I need, Vince. You are good and honest and you see me, truly see me. I love you." "Is that a yes?" "That is a yes." He pulled her into his arms, and she felt safe in a way she had never experienced before, as if all the fear and uncertainty of the past months had led her exactly where she needed to be. When he kissed her, gentle and reverent, she tasted salt from her own tears and smiled against his lips. They married 3 weeks later in Carlin, in the small church at the edge of town. Pete and Samuel stood as witnesses, along with a few of Vincent's friends and some of Lillian's newer acquaintances from her commissioned work. She wore a simple white dress that Vincent had bought for her in Guthrie and carried wildflowers picked from the ranch property. The ceremony was brief but meaningful, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Vincent looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. The small gathering celebrated with cake and music at the restaurant where they had first shared a meal, and Lillian felt overwhelmed by the strange fortune that had brought her from desperate poverty to this moment of pure joy. At night, they returned to the ranch as husband and wife. Vincent carried her over the threshold with exaggerated ceremony that made her laugh, and Rusty barked his approval from his spot by the fireplace. They moved together to Vincent's bedroom, which was now their bedroom, and made love with a tenderness that felt sacred. Afterward, lying in his arms, Lillian traced patterns on his chest and thought about how far she had come. From selling sketches on a street corner to this, to being loved and cherished, to having a home and a future. "What are you thinking?" Vincent asked, his voice drowsy. "That I am the luckiest woman alive. I am the lucky one. We can both be lucky." He laughed and pulled her closer. "I like that arrangement." Fall arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and spectacular sunsets. Lillian's art continued to flourish. Word of her talent spread throughout the territory, and she received commissions from as far as Oklahoma City and Tulsa. She worked steadily, building a reputation, and Vincent supported her completely, proud of her success. They settled into married life with surprising ease. Vincent taught her to ride properly, and they explored the property together on horseback, finding hidden meadows and scenic overlooks. She packed picnic lunches, and they would eat under the open sky while she sketched, and he talked about his dreams for the ranch. "I want to build a bigger house eventually," he said one afternoon. "Something with a proper studio for you with good light and space for all your supplies. This house is perfect, but you deserve better. You deserve everything." She kissed him, tasting coffee and contentment. "I have everything I need right here." Winter came hard and fast, just as Vincent had warned. Snow blanketed the ranch, and temperatures dropped until the water in the trough froze solid each night. They worked together to care for the animals, to ensure everyone and everything survived the brutal cold. On the worst days, when the wind howled like something alive, and the cold seeped through every crack, they stayed inside by the fire. Vincent read aloud from newspapers and books while Lillian sketched or worked on a quilt. Sometimes they just talked, sharing stories from their pasts, dreams for their future, observations about the world. "I want children someday," Vincent said one evening. "If you do too." Lillian looked up from her stitching. They had not discussed this yet, though she had thought about it. "I do. I want to fill this house with life and laughter." "How many?" "As many as we are blessed with," he grinned. "That could be a lot. I suppose we will manage." By spring, Lillian was pregnant. They discovered it in March, when the first flowers were pushing through the last of the snow and the cattle were calving. She had suspected for a few weeks, but wanted to be certain before saying anything. Vincent's reaction was everything she could have hoped for. He swept her into his arms, spinning her around despite her protests, laughing with pure joy. Then he set her down carefully, as if she had suddenly become made of glass. "Are you well? Do you need anything? Should you be resting?" "I am fine, Vince. Women have been having babies for thousands of years. But not my baby, not carrying someone who is half me and half you." His wonder and protectiveness made her fall in love with him all over again. Throughout the pregnancy, he was attentive without being smothering, taking on extra work around the house so she could rest, bringing her special treats from town, talking to her belly when he thought she was asleep. She continued to draw, capturing her changing body in self-portraits, sketching Vincent's hands on her stomach, documenting this transformation. Her work took on new depth, infused with the profound experience of creating life. The baby came in November, a few weeks after their first anniversary. The labor was long and difficult, attended by a midwife from Carlin and supported by Vincent, who never left her side despite the traditional expectation that men should wait elsewhere. "I am not leaving you," he said when the midwife suggested he go. "We are in this together." Lillian held his hand through the contractions, through the pushing, through the final tremendous effort that brought their son into the world. A boy, red-faced and screaming, perfect in every way. "Thomas," Lillian said when they had cleaned the baby and placed him in her arms. Thomas Vincent Quade. After your father, Vincent said, his voice thick with emotion. He would have liked you, would have been proud to have you as a son-in-law. They sat together in the aftermath, marveling at the tiny human they had created, at his miniature fingers and the way he rooted instinctively for food. Vincent touched his son's head with a tenderness that made Lillian's heart swell. "We made this," he said wonderingly. "This perfect person." "We did." Motherhood was harder than Lillian had anticipated, the constant demands of a newborn leaving her exhausted and overwhelmed. But Vincent was a true partner, changing diapers and walking the floor with Thomas when he cried, giving Lillian breaks to rest or draw or simply be alone for a few moments. "You are better at this than most men," the midwife commented during a follow-up visit. "He is my son," Vincent said simply. "Why would I not care for him?" As Thomas grew, so did the ranch. Vincent hired additional hands, expanded the cattle operation, invested in breeding horses. The territory itself grew, moving steadily toward statehood, and with it came more opportunities. Lillian's artwork gained recognition, her landscapes appearing in territorial publications and private collections throughout the region. She sold a series of drawings documenting ranch life to a newspaper in Chicago, which published them with an article about the changing West. The payment was substantial, and she used it to buy Vincent a new saddle and equipment, to contribute meaningfully to their growing prosperity. "You do not need to spend your earnings on the ranch," Vincent protested. "It is our ranch, our life. I want to invest in it just as you invest in my art." 2 years after Thomas was born, Lillian became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy was easier, and she continued working almost until her due date, driven by a commission to create a series of seasonal landscapes for a wealthy family in Oklahoma City. Their daughter arrived in September, smaller than Thomas had been but just as healthy. They named her Caroline Rose, and she had Vincent's storm-colored eyes and Lillian's dark hair. Thomas, now a toddling 2-year-old, was fascinated by his new sister, wanting to touch her constantly with his chubby hands. "Gentle," Lillian coached. "She is very small." "Baby," Thomas said proudly, patting Caroline's head with exaggerated care. Life became beautifully chaotic. Lillian balanced motherhood and art, sometimes sketching with Caroline sleeping in a sling across her chest and Thomas playing at her feet. Vincent balanced ranching and fatherhood, teaching Thomas about animals and responsibility while changing Caroline's diapers without complaint. They were partners in every sense, supporting each other's dreams and ambitions while building something lasting together. The ranch prospered. Lillian's reputation as an artist grew. Their children thrived, healthy and loved. On their 5th anniversary, Vincent took Lillian back to the creek where he had first declared his feelings. The children were with Pete's daughter for the evening, giving them rare time alone. They sat on the bank, watching the sunset paint the water in familiar golds and pinks. "Do you remember what you said that first day in Carlin?" Vincent asked. "About capturing moments that will never exist again." "I do. You have given me so many moments worth capturing, so many days worth living fully." He turned to face her, and she saw the same love in his eyes that had been there from the beginning, perhaps deepened by time and experience. "I was existing before you, going through motions. You taught me what it means to truly live." Lillian thought about that younger version of herself, desperate and alone, selling sketches to survive. She thought about the landscape that had seemed so empty and merciless, and how Vincent had shown her the beauty in it, the possibility. "You gave me a view worth living for," she said softly. "Not just of the land, but of what life could be, what I could be." "And what are you now?" she smiled. "Happy, fulfilled, loved, an artist, a wife, a mother, everything I never dared to dream." Vincent kissed her as the sun completed its descent, and Lillian felt the same sense of rightness she had experienced on their wedding day. This was her life now, these golden moments strung together like beads on a cord. Not perfect, but real and earned and precious. The years continued their steady march. Thomas grew into a sturdy boy who loved the ranch and the animals, who followed his father everywhere and asked endless questions. Caroline became a bright-eyed child with her mother's artistic inclinations, always drawing and creating. Lillian captured them constantly in her art, documenting their childhoods with the same careful attention she had once given to landscapes. When Oklahoma achieved statehood in 1907, Vincent and Lillian attended the celebration in Guthrie with their children. Thomas was 10, Caroline 8, and they were joined by a third child, a son named Matthew, who was 3. The family stood in the crowd as the ceremony unfolded, witnessing history. "This is where you will grow up," Vincent told his children. "In a state, not a territory. With law and order and opportunity. And with stories," Lillian added. "Never forget the stories of how this place came to be, the people who built it." That night, as they drove back to the ranch in their wagon, the children asleep in the back, Vincent reached for Lillian's hand. "20 years," he said, "since we met. Has it been that long? You were selling sketches on a street corner. I was a cowboy looking for one more meal and a rest. And now we are everything I never knew I needed." Lillian squeezed his hand, feeling the familiar calluses, the strength that had never wavered. "I was sketching landscapes to survive. You gave me a view worth living for. We gave each other that," he corrected gently. "Your art, your perspective, your strength, they saved me as much as I saved you." More years passed, bringing changes and challenges. There were droughts and harsh winters, market fluctuations, and the endless work of maintaining a ranch. There were illnesses and injuries, the normal trials of raising children. But through it all, Vincent and Lillian faced everything together. Her art continued to evolve and gain recognition. She held a showing in Oklahoma City when Thomas was 15, displaying decades of work that documented the territory's transformation into statehood. Critics praised her eye for detail, her ability to capture not just the land but the spirit of the place and time. Vincent stood beside her at the showing, proud and slightly uncomfortable in his formal suit, shaking hands with wealthy patrons and art collectors. She caught him looking at her throughout the evening with an expression of wonder, as if he still could not quite believe his fortune. "You are staring," she murmured during a quiet moment. "I am admiring. There is a difference. What are you admiring? How far you have come. How you turned survival into success, sketches into art. How you made something beautiful out of hardship." He touched her face gently. "You are extraordinary, Lillian. I had help. You had talent and determination. I just gave you a safe place to use them." The children grew and eventually left to pursue their own dreams. Thomas stayed in Oklahoma, starting his own ranch with his father's guidance. Caroline went east to study art formally, following in her mother's footsteps. Matthew became a veterinarian, combining his love of animals with scientific training. Vincent and Lillian found themselves alone again, older and grayer but no less devoted. They settled into a quieter rhythm, working the ranch with hired help, traveling occasionally to visit their children and growing number of grandchildren. On Lillian's 60th birthday, Vincent gave her a wooden box filled with every sketch she had ever done of him, carefully preserved and organized chronologically. She had not realized he had kept them all. "This is the story of us," he said as she looked through them with tears streaming down her face. "Your hand, your eye, your heart, capturing what we built together." She found the sketch she had made that first day in the wagon, the one she had hidden because it felt too revealing. He was young in it, still weathered but without the gray in his hair, looking off at something beyond the frame. Beneath it, in her handwriting, she had written, "The man who saw me." "I saved it," Vincent said quietly, "because you saw me too. Really saw me. Not just a cowboy or a rancher, but the person underneath." They sat together on the porch they had shared for so many years, looking out at land they had worked and loved, and Lillian thought about the journey that had brought them here. From desperation to hope, from survival to thriving, from two lonely people to a family, a legacy. "If you could go back," Vincent asked, "to that day in Carlin when I offered you work, would you change anything?" Lillian did not hesitate. Not a single moment. Even the hard parts. Especially the hard parts. They made the beautiful parts more meaningful. He kissed her temple, and they sat in comfortable silence as the sun set in shades of amber and gold, painting the landscape in colors Lillian had spent a lifetime trying to capture. But she did not reach for her sketchbook, did not try to preserve this particular moment in charcoal and paper. Some things were meant to be simply lived and remembered, held in the heart rather than on the page. This was one of those moments, perfect in its ordinary beauty, in the simple fact of two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life worth celebrating. As darkness fell and stars emerged in the vast Oklahoma sky, they went inside together, hand in hand, ready for whatever tomorrow might bring. The ranch would continue, their children would thrive, and the legacy they had built would endure. And somewhere in Oklahoma City, in a gallery that specialized in Western art, Lillian's landscapes hung on pristine white walls, each one a testament to survival and beauty. To the view one cowboy had given a desperate artist so many years ago. The view that had transformed everything, that had shown her what life could be when seen through the lens of love and possibility. The final drawing in her collection, the one she completed just before the showing, was titled simply, "Home." It depicted the ranch at sunset, the house with its wraparound porch, the barn and corrals, the endless sky above it all. And in the foreground, two figures stood side by side, close enough to touch, looking out at everything they had built together. It was Vincent's favorite piece, though he joked that he might be biased. He was, he said, rather fond of the subject matter, having lived it every day for the past 40 years and hoping to live it for many more. And they did, growing old together on the land they loved, surrounded by children and grandchildren, secure in the knowledge that they had found something rare and precious. Not just love, though they had that in abundance, but partnership, friendship, the deep understanding that comes from truly seeing and being seen by another person. When Vincent finally passed at 78, peacefully in his sleep with Lillian beside him, she grieved deeply but without regret. They had lived a full life together, had created beauty and family and meaning. At his funeral, she displayed a final portrait of him, one she had drawn the week before his death, capturing the lines earned by years of laughter and hard work, the kindness that had never dimmed in his storm-colored eyes. "He gave me everything," she told their gathered children and grandchildren. "Hope when I had none, belief when I had lost faith in myself, love when I thought I would spend my life alone. He saw me when I was invisible to the rest of the world, and he gave me a view worth living for." Lillian lived for 5 more years, continuing to create art until her hands became too unsteady to hold the charcoal. She spent her final months surrounded by family, telling stories about the old days, about the Oklahoma Territory before statehood, about a young woman selling sketches on a street corner and the cowboy who had changed everything. When she died, quietly in her sleep at 83, they buried her beside Vincent on a hill overlooking the ranch. The headstone was simple. Lillian Novak Quade, 1867–1950, artist and beloved wife, mother, grandmother. She captured beauty wherever she found it. Her final sketchbook, discovered by Caroline among her mother's possessions, contained detailed drawings of Vincent from throughout their marriage. Young Vincent driving the wagon, middle-aged Vincent teaching his son to rope cattle, elderly Vincent reading on the porch in the evening light. Each one was labeled with a date and a few words of description. On the final page, in Lillian's elegant handwriting, was a note: "To my children and their children and all who come after. This is what love looks like, lived day by day over a lifetime." Not grand gestures or dramatic moments, though we had those too, but the steady accumulation of shared experiences, of seeing and being seen, of choosing each other again and again. Your father gave me a view worth living for, and I spent my life trying to capture it, to share the beauty he showed me. May you all be so fortunate as to find what we found, to build what we built. With all my love, always. The ranch remained in the Quade family, passed down through generations, each one adding their own chapter to the story. But the original house stood preserved, a testament to the couple who had built it, who had transformed it from a simple structure into a home filled with love and laughter. And in museums and galleries throughout Oklahoma and beyond, Lillian's landscapes continued to inspire new generations of artists and viewers. They captured a specific time and place, the wild and beautiful Oklahoma territory in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. But more than that, they captured hope and resilience, the human capacity to find beauty even in hardship, to create meaning from struggle. Art historians would later note that Lillian's work underwent a dramatic shift after 1887, moving from technically proficient but emotionally distant landscapes to pieces infused with warmth and life. They speculated about what had caused the change, what had transformed her from a skilled craftsperson into a true artist. Those who knew the story understood. It was not a what but a who. A cowboy named Vincent Quade, who had seen a desperate young woman selling sketches to survive, and had offered her more than employment, more than safety. He had offered her a partnership, a future, and most importantly, a view of what life could be when shared with someone who truly saw and valued her. She had been sketching landscapes to survive, capturing moments to sell for pennies, documenting a world that seemed indifferent to her existence. And then Vincent had appeared, offering her not just a different view, but a completely different way of seeing. He had shown her that landscape was not just scenery but home, not just something to be captured and sold, but something to be lived and loved. Together, they had built a life that became the most beautiful landscape of all, one that could not be contained in charcoal and paper, but existed in the steady rhythm of shared days, in children raised and land tended, in quiet evenings on a porch watching the sun set over Oklahoma plains. A view worth living for, worth building for, worth loving for. A view they had given each other, and that endured long after they were gone, in the land they had shaped, the family they had created, and the art that captured it all for anyone who cared to look closely enough to see not just what was there, but what it meant.